coming up as global media focus on regions plummeting further into conflict.
We still believe that there can be time and space for a diplomatic solution here, and that's what we're working on.
And the souped-up storms and forest fires that wreak havoc on the unprepared. A new report sheds light on a largely unseen crisis.
For those people who may not care, I'm here to tell them, pay attention to the warning, pay attention to the early warning system. It is telling you something about what you may lose tomorrow if you don't do something.
And rhinos too are in crisis. New data shows they're at risk across the Asian continent.
But there are 3 rhino species living in Asia, and actually 2 of them, they're doing not very well.
But first, an update on the controversial Loss and Damage Fund, as a pre-COP19 meeting in Azerbaijan reveals deep rifts over climate finance and compensation.
And the major sticking point that we see here is that there is clearly not agreement on what you can count as climate finance.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
There's funding going toward the Ukraine war. Now there's the war on Gaza that Israel's waged. Now there's Lebanon, there's Yemen, there's Syria, there are wars in Africa. Do you think that these wars are redirecting funding from climate projects?
Absolutely.
Welcome to the program. I'm Reagan. So you know we're gearing up for the COP29 climate summit in Azerbaijan, and all eyes are on this Loss and Damage Fund. So you've got to know that a board has been selected to oversee the fund. The World Bank, controversially appointed as its based, and the Philippines chosen as the host country.
As much as we can celebrate getting billions of dollars, but if they don't actually are accessible, they're available and affordable to those who need them, it may be the headlines of the billions, but doesn't get to where it's needed.
Ibrahima Sheikh Diong, a Senegalese banker, has been appointed to the fund. He's got about 3 decades of experience in public and private banking. But that won't make it easy. Last year at COP28 in Dubai, governments committed a mere $660 million to the fund, while experts argue trillions are needed. But there is some good news, as reports suggest that disbursements to disaster-hit nations may begin as early as next year.
Are things moving as smoothly as they appear? Well, our friends at ActionAid were closely following these high-level climate finance talks in Azerbaijan. So I called up the company's global lead on climate finance, Teresa Anderson, to find out those details.
All right, let's start with your post on X, which it made me smile, made me laugh, frustrated me, but you know, that's the nature of it. So you posted, quote, "Developed countries coy talk of a multi-layered approach to finance is code for their efforts to count loans and private investments towards the new climate finance goal." And you added, if they could, rich countries would probably like to count the sun, the moon, and grandpa's old socks as climate finance too. All right. Why are you so upset after those talks in Baku?
Well, countries have been meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan, in order to try to make progress on this critical goal. And what really emerged is there's some talk of convergence, but really still major sticking points. And the major sticking point that we see here is that there is clearly not agreement on what you can count as climate finance. Whereas we know that rich countries need to provide grants, real money worth trillions of dollars to those on the front line, and that just giving loans and corporate permits is not going to help those most in need. So we're getting really frustrated at how rich countries are just trying to pad out this goal. I mean, at least they're starting to recognize now that the goal needs to be in the trillions of dollars. But the real question is trillions of what? Trillions of whatever or trillions of real money?
Aqui a gente está perguntando quem é que vai pagar, por exemplo, por esse evento climático extremo que está acontecendo aqui na Amazônia, todas as consequências. Importante a gente falar que as populações mais vulnerabilizadas, que são os povos indígenas, os povos tradicionais, pescadores, pescadoras, o povo da periferia que vive nas cidades da Amazônia, são os que estão pagando o maior preço para esse evento climático extremo causado pelas indústrias de petróleo e gás ao redor do mundo.
And of course, they're using the climate destruction as an opportunity to earn more money which is why they want to use loans instead. I recall rich countries were strongly recommending that countries like the UAE and China, this is something the US had been recommended, these countries should be contributors of climate finance. Do you think that is a solution to make up for the funding gap?
I think that is pure distraction, pure geopolitical whataboutery, to be honest. Because China, UAE, even Singapore, they're already providing money voluntarily to the global south. There's already substantial amounts of voluntary South-South finance. So formalizing that, making it obligatory, is actually not going to change the amount of finance provided in the world. It's not going to increase the amount of money available to the global south. What's more likely to happen is that the US, the Europe, the Canadas are going to say, well, it's not our job anymore, it's those guys. They're going to start pointing the finger and providing less money themselves. So if the rich countries win this fight on expanding the contributor base, we could see less money coming through overall because the rich countries are going to provide less.
I was looking at an interview recently and someone asked, is there enough money? And I think the US politician's response was that there was funding going toward the Ukraine war. Now there's the war on Gaza that Israel's waged. Now there's Lebanon, there's Yemen, there's Syria, there are wars in Africa. Do you think that these wars are redirecting funding from climate projects?
The global economy is 430 trillion. And we're talking about, just even 1 trillion of that. To help save our planet, we must be able to find it.
The reality is that gap between tens and hundreds of billions to trillions is not a number that the bank can fill.
In fact, as ActionAid, we've done calculations that if we were to raise the taxes on the wealthiest and the corporations in the global north by just a few percentage points, we would be able to generate, at least a couple of $1 trillion every year. And that there are other sources such as reallocating fossil fuel subsidies and maybe a levy on frequent flyer taxes, etc. These kinds of things, we know the money is out there, and yet there is just reluctance to admit that, and instead, channeling funding towards business as usual and power plays as usual.
Have you ever seen the Amazon River's pink dolphin or the hawksbill turtle? Well, the World Wildlife Fund says these beautiful species are dying out.
And they're not the only ones that could face extinction and lead to the collapse of ecosystems that rely on them. The WWF has identified alarming reductions in the size of wildlife populations, with the steepest declines in Latin America and the Caribbean, followed by Africa and the Asia Pacific. And the organization says the main culprit is the way we eat.
Do you think people care that plant and animal species populations are in decline? I mean, what do you tell someone who asks, what does it matter that there's a 57% decline in nesting female hawksbill turtles? What do you say to someone like that who can't see the impact of these turtles on the ecosystem and then the butterfly effect, etc.?
Okay, so the decline of populations and species of itself may not look attractive or understandable to a lot of people, but it is an indicator, an early warning indicator of ecosystem collapse, and that ecosystem is losing resilience. Now, it's warning you, please do something before you begin to lose the benefits that you depend on, that you understand. For example, fresh air, the ability to sequester carbon, the ability to regulate the climate and the environment. Those benefits, those ecosystem services that we so take, that are components of important parts of our life, are produced by ecosystems. Now, these declines are telling you, hey, something is wrong with your ecosystem. Please fix it before you begin to lose your ecosystem functions. For those people who may not care, I'm here to tell them, pay attention to the warning, pay attention to the early warning system. It is telling you something about what you may lose tomorrow if you don't do something.
What is the number one reason why nature is in decline?
If you look at a normal village person in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, you don't need to educate them about the value of these insects because they live in nature and they experience the interactions with these insects and these other every day, and they see what happens and the benefits. So it is for us conservation organizations to work with others like the media, to re-educate this public that is removed from nature so that they can understand the importance of nature and begin to contribute actively to addressing the problems of nature we are facing. The way we are using land, the way we are using seas, the way we are using waterways, that is one of the biggest drivers of nature loss. The food system is one of the biggest. How we use land for food is one of the biggest ways in which we are degrading nature, because we are converting even larger swaths of nature so that we can provide food for the growing population. Of course, there are other reasons why nature has declined. For example, we have climate change, which is the most cited case for reduction of nature across the face of the earth. We have pollution. You may have heard of plastic pollution. It's a big problem in especially marine landscapes and marine seascapes. We have exploitation of natural resources. We are using more than the earth can hold or replenish. And all these things are driving the decline of nature across the face of the earth.
So how do we address food as the issue if many organizations refuse to address the fact that our meat consumption is a huge problem?
There are better ways, sustainable ways of producing food that doesn't degrade the environment. And we need to transition to those better methods. The second way in which, the second part of the food system is food waste and food loss. We are wasting and losing too much food. A lot of food, yes, is produced, enough for human populations, but the amount of food that we are wasting, is unacceptable. If we were to reduce the food that we are wasting, I can tell you we'll be able to feed the populations of the earth without expanding production.
I think it highlights the wealth inequalities as well. The rich are less affected and possibly won't care enough to help make things better.
Yeah, you're talking about the aspect of food security. In the north, people are food secure even if they don't produce food because they have the money to buy food. But in the developed countries and in the global south, people actually produce what they eat. Okay? So there's a very direct relationship for them between what they produce and the nature loss they can experience while they're producing the food. But I think the larger issue here is education. Educating people on these interlinkages is critical. I'll give you a good example. Fast food in the US, for example, People didn't just start being cautious about fast food without education. It was real deliberate education that helped people to see that fast food was great, but it lacked the nutritional value required for good life. So education will be critical, it will be a critical component in helping us to address this issue systematically.
Also in crisis, rhinoceros populations. At the end of 2023, 23,885 black and white rhinos were counted across African states. That's according to the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
We don't know yet what this year's final count will be, but the animals seem to be growing in number. And that's in part thanks to the various conservation programs working to prevent these species from going extinct. World Rhino Day, which is celebrated every 22nd of September, is all about that, to educate people about all 5 rhino species and the work being done to save them.
Gouged out to ice.
We need all of the rhinos protected. We mustn't have any downlisting. This is now these species, they are looking extinction in the face, and it's our fault.
I believe a lot more attention has been placed on African rhino species, which I understand have been recovering over the years. What's the situation with species in Asia? Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question because we have 5 rhino species and the white rhino has 2 subspecies. So 2 rhino species living in Africa and much more known to the public, but there are 3 rhino species living in Asia, and actually 2 of them, doing not very well. These 2 rhinos living in 2 rhino species living in Indonesia. It's the Javan rhino and the Sumatran rhino. I give you some numbers, population size-wise. Sumatran rhino is about 35, maybe 50, and the Javan rhino is 60 to 70 individuals. So that's a very frightening number. And actually, the biorescue program, Saving the Northern White Rhino, had really a huge effect on the activities on the Sumatran and Javan rhino. Our Indonesian colleagues are in very close contact with us, and we are heavily involved in setting up a similar program in Indonesia, what we did in Africa. So biorescue working on a Northern White Rhino helps directly the Asian species too.
These animals, they are really amazing, but so sad, because we end up losing such kinds of species because of human failure. People used to kill rhinos because of their horns, and many people have been believing that they use as medicine, but it doesn't cure anyone at all. So, but what we are doing is that we are creating awareness to everyone to see the importance of conserving such kind of animals. We don't want them to become prehistoric like dinosaurs. And in fact, they really look so amazing.
But when you think about conservation, quite often we lump everything together to protect biodiversity, plants, animals. We don't really go into the specifics of it often. Do you think this has harmed conservation efforts for rhino species? So you question whether or not people actually care enough about this issue?
Yeah, and with rhinos, we have a quite specific situation because they are not so charismatic like a giant panda or an elephant. So the rhinos looks more like an ancient species, a little bit closer to dinosaurs than it is actually an attractive mammal. And that is really the point why not so many people are enthusiastic of rhino conservation.
They seem to go through the same emotions that humans do, losing their mothers, witnessing what they do sometimes, their mothers being slaughtered, their horns being butchered off, and you pick up on those emotions from them. They're sad, they're traumatized. Some of them experience PTSD. They start calling, and that hits you right in the heart, that calling for mom. Some of them only call for a day or so. Usually the younger calves stabilize much easier than the older calves who've been with their mothers for longer. Some of the older calves take it really hard. They'll call for up to 2 weeks for their mothers, and it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking.
One of our task to really demonstrate the function of rhinos in the ecosystem, and that we really have to save them. Otherwise, we will lose a lot of plants because they are a megavertebrate which eats a lot of food based on plant material. And so they distribute seeds. They are making pathways in ecosystems which are used as an avenue for a lot of smaller mammals. They produce a lot of dung, which is the basis for a lot of insects. The insects are the nutritional basis for bats, for example. So if we shake up this very complex system, which we not even really understand in its complexity, then we have a high risk to come up with the same scenario like we had with COVID-19, because that was a bat-driven disease. And if there's no feces of rhinos, there are no insects. So the bats don't find food. So they migrate to human settlements, and then they distribute their germs. So I think the complexity and what it actually caused is very, very difficult to understand, but we know if we don't save the rhinos, the world will change.
And speaking of saving rhinos, I know the northern white rhino, I believe, is the species the most endangered in the world. There are just about 2 of them left. I believe they're both female. I know there's been a lot of science and technology trying to revitalize the species. How is that going? And do you think once we've accomplished this task, that we can use this across the board to save any species that's dying out?
Yeah, and so we started the program with developing a strategic map in 2015 together with 20 other experts. And since then, surprisingly, we made a lot of progress. We have now 33 embryos, pure northern white rhino embryos, which are ready for transfer. And you have to keep in mind, we have only 2 infertile females. We have frozen semen from 4 different males, and we have cell lines from 12 different individuals. In addition, we developed a new strategy together with a company which is quite well known for their ambitious project with the mammoths. The company is called Colossal. We developed with them the strategy that we go to museums and look into skulls and extract the ancient DNA from this material, so that we see what kinds of gene combination were 100, 200 years ago present on this planet. And then we use this information and manipulate with the so-called gene editing technology fibroblasts. That's little cells which form our skin, and these fibroblasts then can be transformed in sperm and egg producing cells. So that means we can actually restore the complete genetic profile of the rhino species with this complex approach, as it was 200 years ago when the humans had not firearms to kill rhinos. And that means this, keep in mind, this is very costly. It takes a lot of resources, and is much wiser for the human society to be careful with the biodiversity of our planet, because we need the biodiversity.
And that's our show. I hope you took in this reminder that all life, both big and small, matters. And I think it's wise that we consider the potential consequences if many of these animals under threat disappear entirely.